Collins Wanderi served as a legal advisor to the Kenya Air Force Command and is renowned for his research into the Chinese military. He's highlighted China's comprehensive strength and its growing influence in bringing stability to war-torn regions.
So the peacekeeping operations China has participated in Africa have been welcome. In terms of image, China promotes the image of neutrality, the image of support and a defender of the interests of peace and stability. And that is the image that most of the people in Africa have of the Chinese People's Liberation Army, especially when they're involved in peace operations.
China has a presence in 9 United Nations peacekeeping missions worldwide, 7 of which are in Africa. As of 2016, more than 2,400 Chinese peacekeepers had been deployed to South Sudan, Mali, Liberia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. A former colonel in the Kenyan Army, Roosevelt Nguku, has studied the Chinese People's Liberation Army for 2 years. He's impressed by historical events such as the Long March and the War of Liberation.
When I visited China for training in 2009-2010, there was a very big change because all areas of the military had been computerized, and you had advanced technologies in terms of satellite, in terms of computers, in terms of nuclear forces, which are purely defensive. And we needed a sober country like China.
China has already put 1 of 2 commissioned aircraft carriers into service, boosting its military strength. Experts say this means that the PLA will be able to offer a more sophisticated and effective response, no matter where in the world it's needed. Leslie Marungu, CGTN.
Well, let's get you more perspective from that now, and I'm joined here in studio by Dr. Robert Kagiri. He is the Strategy and Policy Management Director at the Africa Policy Institute. Robert, thank you for joining us here on the link. Of course, many are going to be watching the launch of that support and logistics base here in Djibouti, particularly across the continent. So what's the significance, though, for Chinese opening that support base here in Djibouti?
Thank you very much for having me. Particular interest to Africa and to the AU and everyone, and the geopolitical perspective. From the geopolitical perspective is that China is now committing itself further to Africa. We know that they are fully committed in terms of infrastructure development. We are part and parcel of their One Belt, One Road initiative that was launched by President Xi Jinping. And strategically, that particular port, the Djibouti port, is of very big concern to them because they just completed the Djibouti railway last year, and this year they've completed the Mombasa-Nairobi standard gauge railway. So as they're investing more in our infrastructure, their interests are being intertwined with African interests. So what we are seeing now is more commitment in terms of policing that particular area, which has been subject to a lot of security concerns, especially piracy and ongoing internal conflicts. So not only are they supporting Africa peacekeeping efforts, but they are also, in a sense, looking after their own interests.
You talk about that going to support anti-piracy efforts on the Indian coast, particularly with its close proximity to Somalia there. So how do you see, though, that base in the region targeting those anti-piracy moves?
Well, okay, piracy has basically dropped in the last few years, but we've seen a resurgence. There have been at least 2 pirate attacks recently. And what this base will do is be a sort of preemptive strike against the proliferation and expansion of piracy, which had diminished quite a bit. So what we'll be seeing is that there are already other players in these waters. The Americans are there, the French are there, and to a certain extent the Japanese are also present within that port of Djibouti area. So what this does is a projection that China is going to play a significant role in policing that particular area. It's strategic for them because it also is a pathway to the Suez Canal and to the other, what we call MENA countries, which is Middle East and North African countries. So it's of strategic importance to them, and for Africa, it's particularly important because this is an area that has in the past been subjected to a lot of piracy.
Let's look at that importance as well for Africa here, because obviously Chinese military has been present in UN peacekeeping missions across the continent here in several countries on the continent. Will we see Chinese peacekeepers, though? Will we see their presence now in perhaps parts of East Africa?
We're already seeing that. You know that some of the key missions, like the United Nations mission in South Sudan, they've been very involved. But with this base, I'm expecting, under the auspices of the UN, for them to be even more involved in peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts, not just peacekeeping. So I'm expecting that this will form a good launch pad for them to play a larger role in ensuring that conflict is reduced, and where conflict exists, humanitarian action is taken quickly. And it's also, in a way, a part of their humanitarian diplomacy projection that and soft power through humanitarian diplomacy, that they are willing to invest a lot in Africa without looking like a threat, but supporting African efforts and UN efforts in particular at peacekeeping. So this is a significant step by them. Maybe many will see it as protecting their interests, but they are also, to a large extent, helping African countries also in resolving some of the problems they've had, and also supporting continuous growth in their infrastructural development.
Right, Robert Kagiri, we'll leave it there for the moment, but thank you very much for joining us here on the link. And of course, as you've heard, this is a significant move, particularly for African countries, and many African countries are going to be watching this with particular interest, as you've heard their analysts maintaining. It is significant because China promotes a level of neutrality on the continent, and that is all very welcome. Back to you, Jonathan.